welcome back to Moffett Field. Today I'm going to go through a game I picked up on eBay after reading about it called Europe Engulfed by GMT Games, the same game as that Spanish Civil War that I did. 2006 version 2. So here we go. It looks similar in terms of the map to Axis and Allies Europe, Global 40. A little similar, more or less. Obviously it's Europe, and it's a pretty good size. I'd say it's about 3.5 feet by 3.5 feet. I have it on my Global 40 board here. Metal board, takes up about half of it. It's made out of little flimsy cardboard, so you can see I have magnets in a couple places to hold it down. But overall it's printed well, it's well designed. It has, at the bottom down here, it has a tracker, a turn tracker with years. Each turn is 2 months. There's a weather section, I'll go over that. There's desert, and there's a couple different sea zones. There's the Atlantic, the Mediterranean, the Baltic, the Black Sea. The islands are pretty well represented. There's ports. There's these kind of airline looking things that are for determining where you can fly combat air support. There's as I mentioned, ports, and those are important for supply. What else is on the map here? There's the Maginot Line. There's these supply areas, or these production areas that have kind of the very similar looking factory as Axis and Allies. These arrows indicate where amphibious assaults can take place and how many units can participate in that amphibious assault. And those are accomplished with these special action tokens, and I'll go over those in a little bit. These round tokens that are for purchase. It tells how many points you get for production. They call them warps, similar to IPCs. What else? Up here you have a game tracker and a sub tracker. I'll go through that. There's a weather section. So the way the weather works, there's 3 weather areas. There's the west, which is clear at the moment. There's the east, which is snowing, and then there's the southern region, which is Africa and Southern Europe, and it's clear at the moment. Weather is determined by a die roll, and it's either set for the turn or it has some variable components to it as well. And weather affects die roll modifiers, so when it's snowing, certain things happen to armor. You can't bring in airplanes. In mud, infantry get a bonus factor on the die roll. So weather comes into play, and it makes the game a little more interesting. I tried to attack into the Netherlands during a snowstorm and got destroyed because my air units, represented by these round discs with the airplanes on them, couldn't participate. So as I mentioned earlier, maybe I didn't mention earlier, but this is a kind of a token, or more of a counter-based game with flavors of Axis and Allies. And you can see here, if you're familiar with those types of games, they have steps, which kind of represent how many hits a unit can take. So this French unit is a 2-step. These Italian units up here are 2 and 3 and 3 and 2. And the way it works is when a unit gets a hit, you can rotate to represent it taking hits. And then during your turn, you can spend money to rebuild it back up, which is pretty interesting. And the way combat works is, so example, let's say this German unit decided to attack this Turkish unit. So you would move in there, and there's different kinds of moves. There's basically combat movement and non-combat movement. I think they call it operational movement and strategic movement, but it's basically the same thing. There's combat movement, and then you can move again after. So this guy would roll in here. Let's say he's at a 3. So theoretically, he would roll a 3. But the defending Turks would get 2 dice, and the dice are indicated by the number of steps that you have. So this guy should have 3, and this guy should have 2. He's attacking into a mountain area, so the defender normally rolls a 6 to get a hit. But in this case, because of a die roll modifier, the Turks could get a 5 and a 6. So let's say they rolled that 5 and a 6. Since the defender rolls first, this 3 would be reduced to a 1. So the Germans would have to attack with a 1, and they would have to roll a 6 to get a hit. So they would probably retreat after that if they can. Retreating depends upon either playing a special action or leaving behind. Sometimes you have to leave behind troops to cover the retreat, covering troops. So that's kind of how combat works. These special action tokens that I was speaking about, they cost $5 or 5 IPCs or 5 warps, and they allow different actions. So you can, if you want to do an amphibious assault, you need to play one of those. If you want to do an airborne assault, you need to play one of those. If you want to retreat, you have to play one. So it have these. If you want to prevent a unit being eliminated because it's out of supply, you can play those. So they provide different kinds of actions. If you want to do a breakthrough, so let's say you move into space and you're successful and you want to move on to the next space, you can play that and have a breakthrough combat, weather permitting. In terms of how much these things cost and how much components in the production phase cost, so you can see here an infantry step cost 1 if you want to rebuild, airborne's 2, there's fortifications, the ground support air units cost 5, fighter and bomber points, I'll show you what those are, that's like strategic bombing. There's flak. U-boats come into play quite a bit. They're pretty cheap, but so far they've been taking away some production points from the British. And then there's the special action down at the bottom, and there's the most expensive thing on here is the anti-submarine warfare. And there's also navies here, which are pretty expensive, and I'll show you that right now. So the way navies work, they're represented by these square tokens, and the British start off with the most. The Italians have a couple, the Germans have a couple, and these are basically fleets, and they have different purposes. They can be used to supply troops that are out of supply normally, like Africa needs it. You can supply through a port to a ship to a port. So that's how the Italians have to supply Italy. That's how the British have to supply Gibraltar. So they can provide supply to units. They can attack other fleets. They can participate in amphibious assaults. And then a strategic move, they can move units as well. So you can move units from Great Britain to Egypt using strategic move with fleet. Fleets require supply though, so you have to supply each one of these tokens. So it counts 1 supply point or IPC or warp to supply these naval units. Otherwise, they kind of die. And if units get out of supply, ground units get out of supply at the supply check, you also lose that unit. Again, unless you play a special action. What else do we have here? Fortifications, I think I may have mentioned, but here's it was on the supply, it was on the build chart. Soviets can build those, anybody can build them really, but they provide infantry modifiers. So when you roll the die, again, it's, instead of 6, it's a 5. These blocks here are minor axis, so Hungarians, Romanians, Finns, they come into play in the game for the axis to control, and they also produce a couple points of production. They don't play well together though. If they attack together, the defender gets a modifier. So again, like from a 6 to a 5. I think I mentioned these round icons with the planes on them represent the ground combat, and they either engage in dogfights over the combat or they help the infantry by again modifying die roll. And as you can see here, we're using some of the historical board gaming markers. The game comes with its own markers, but they're kind of big. So we've incorporated the historical board gaming markers. The other thing that comes into play here is, as I mentioned, the sub attacks. So depending on the number of subs that the Germans have and the number of anti-sub warfare that the British have, the Germans can affect the production of the British, and also the U-boats can get sunk as well. Kind of the 6 role again. There's also Lend-Lease that comes into play as soon as France falls. The Americans start sending Lend-Lease to the British and to the Russians, and it's with a die roll, and you add that number of points. But I think it increases as the game goes on. And then over here this is where you keep track of money. It's where you keep track of the number of bombers and fighters that a side has. Keep track of the anti-sub warfare and the flak. And the way the strategic bombing works is that you can, during the strategic movement or attack phase, you can bomb the enemy. And you can bomb their production. So similar to Axis and Allies, you can kind of bomb their factories. And it decreases from the amount of production points they get. You can also bomb rail, which affects the movement, strategic movement of the armies. And I think they can also bomb the individual units and decrease points, but I need to research that some more because we didn't quite get there. We only had one strategic bombing raid and it didn't do much damage. Let's see, what else we have here? I think that pretty much covers it. So we got weather, we have terrain modifiers, we have forts, air combat, naval combat, combat move, non-combat movement, there's marshes, there's weather, there's even partisans. If you leave an uncaptured enemy territory empty, it affects the number of points that you get because there's partisan activity in the area. I think it's a lot more flexible on neutrals in this game. Like attacking a neutral doesn't bring all the neutrals into the game. Just it does allow for the other side to control those units or make amphibious landings a little more, make them easier. So there's kind of the neutral component as well. Overall, it's pretty interesting. I think that one of my goals here also is to see if there's any rule harvesting that can be used for Axis and Allies. I'm always thinking about, can weather be brought in, or how can we make Axis and Allies better, but not necessarily more complicated? And I would say that we started out thinking this game is extremely complicated, but it's because we never played it before. So once you get through the rule book, spend a couple hours on the rule book, it seems like a lot, but so does Axis and Allies. I was taking a lot of notes here. I feel like I'm in college again. But yeah, there's a lot here that can be incorporated. Here's the hit bonus modifiers, as I was mentioning. The special actions section. So again, airborne, amphibious, retreat from combat. So a lot here. Weather. But I think if you spend about 2 hours reading the manual, 2 hours playing a intro game, I think probably by your third game you can have a pretty solid understanding of the game. And there's also this playbook as well, which comes with it. We haven't even touched this. This is mostly optional rules and designer notes, but it has a lot of examples and a lot of has a recommended setup for the 39 game, desert weather. There's a lot in here that we haven't even touched yet, so it'll be fun and interesting to play that as well. So that's about it. I think that'll wrap it up, and as we play more, I'll come back with another video and let you know what else we have learned. Let me know if you have any questions, and take care.